Warning, this video will contain spoilers for all of the first 4 seasons of Malevolent, as well as the opening episode of Season 5, Intermezzo. If you haven't listened to the series, I really suggest that you do, both because it's incredibly well made, and because this video won't make much sense without it. Content-wise, Malevolent is a horror podcast, which means that it touches on a lot of dark topics. If you're sensitive to child death, self-mutilation, or severe mental illness, it might be a good idea to skip this one. Malevolent also draws heavily from the works of H.P. Lovecraft, who was incredibly racist, sexist, and generally just seemed to hate anyone who wasn't him. In creating this video, I am in no way supporting his beliefs, just his eldritch horrors. Finally, I'm testing out a new background for my speed paints, but I'm not totally sure it's safe yet. I don't think it's dangerous, since the pulsing lights are much slower than 3 per second, but I figure being safe, at least while it's still in testing, is probably not a bad idea. If you have photosensitivity, especially towards pulsing lights, it couldn't hurt to just listen to this video or skip it altogether. Soundtracks can tell you a lot about a show. A good soundtrack can set the mood of a scene and provide emphasis when necessary, which allows a degree of control over audience emotions not often seen in non-auditory media. It's no secret that podcasts and audio dramas are some of my favorite avenues for storytelling, and a lot of that comes down to their use of music, which can often go underappreciated. Melodies, by their nature, are usually working in the background, but occasionally a podcast will appear that incorporates its audio elements into the story it tells. I've listened to and tried to keep up with a lot of fiction podcasts, but one that I keep returning to time and again is Harlan Guthrie's Lovecraftian horror mystery series, Malevolent. Between the engaging characters and the creative settings, it'd be hard not to fall in love with the story Harlan almost single-handedly put together, and the monthly updates mean that there's always more to explore. Part of what makes Malevolent so engaging for me, though, is the use of music within its narrative. Music is an essential part of the story Harlan is trying to tell, and in making music so fundamental to his series, he's created a world that feels like it couldn't exist in any other medium. My name is Malachi Ward, and welcome to the Final Phantasmagory. Obviously, music has always been an important part of Malevolent, otherwise I wouldn't have much of a script, but I didn't realize how truly series-spanning it was until midway through the 4th season. The more I looked into it, the more references to music appeared, at which point I went looking for a comprehensive list. The wiki had a few, but the page was a little out of date and not a little incomplete, so I had to continue my search elsewhere. Pretty quickly, though, I realized something I should have known from the start. Nobody had ever had the time or patience to catalog them all. After all, what kind of idiot would want to spend hours scanning through a podcast for something as trivial as music? Yeah, I bet you can guess what I did. Over the course of a week in October, I listened to every single episode of Malevolent that was out at the time, making sure to take meticulous notes on every moment that a diegetic music reference was made. As you can tell, it's not October anymore, which means I've also had to go through and get caught up. I'll actually be including the full list of music references in a community post, which, if I remember, should be linked in the pinned comment. They should all be brought up somewhere in the course of this video, but if you want it, it's there. If I manage to miss anything, which wouldn't surprise me much, feel free to leave those correcting comments under the community post, where they'll be most useful to anyone looking for a comprehensive list. Before I get into the plot-relevant stuff, it's best to address the fact that Malevolent has background music. For our purposes today, I'll be calling that non-diegetic music, which means I also probably have to explain the concept of diegetic music. Originating from the Greek diegesis, diegetic music is any kind of music that exists within the story. Whether it's a live performance, a character humming to themselves, or a tune on a radio, if it's something that the characters can hear, it's diegetic. Non-diegetic music, then, is music that exists outside of the world. It's the score, the background music, the suspenseful violins that creep in whenever things get rough. There obviously aren't actually violinists there, it just serves to make the audience more invested in the story. Sometimes the same song will even serve both purposes. As a great example, let's look at the main theme of Malevolent, titled Faroe's Song. Faroe's song has a lot of lore significance that we'll get into later, and is played by Arthur pretty often, but it's also the most common background song through the entire series. It appears in descriptive scenes, tender scenes, quiet scenes, emotional scenes, and much more, and it's something that the audience pretty quickly grows accustomed to. While you could make the argument that Arthur is hearing Faroe's song in his head, it seems to be more for the audience's benefit than for the benefit of the characters, and thus non-diegetic. While the focus of this video is obviously going to be on the diegetic tracks, I want to take a quick opportunity to call out the background music of Malevolent. On Bandcamp, Malevolent has 11 different tracks, most of which are used exclusively as background music, so I won't get the chance to talk about great songs like Noel's theme because they never make an impact on the contents of the story. If you have the chance, consider going over there, giving the soundtrack a listen or two, and maybe even buying some tracks. With all the work he puts into them, Harlan certainly deserves it. Our earliest looks into the world of Malevolent come from the memories of Arthur Lester, one of Malevolent's two protagonists, and the ears of the audience. Music has been the backbone of Arthur's life, so it unsurprisingly appears a lot in the events of the past. The first appearance of Arthur's love of music comes in Part 20, The King, where Arthur tells John about how music helped him cope with the deaths of his parents. In an attempt to aid the grieving child, a family friend told Arthur to find a creative outlet, and while his first medium was poetry, which Arthur shows a great fondness of throughout the series, the one which stuck the most was music. Part 16, The Path, reveals that Arthur went on to become a composer, and was even met with a bit of success. Apparently several of his songs made it to radio, and according to Part 34, The Butcher, at least one was popular enough to be picked up by Hoagy Carmichael, who, if our reality is any judge, was very popular throughout the early 1900s. One of Arthur's most important songs, though, was a little tune called Faroe's Lullaby, named for his late daughter. He confirms in Part 23, The Past, that he wrote the song, and in Coda we hear several flashbacks to Arthur's time with Faroe, most of which center around this lullaby. The first flashback is the only one where it doesn't appear. Instead, Arthur sits with the infant Faroe at a piano, listening to jazz music over a tinny radio, which is just musical enough for me to mention. It's in the second memory that things start to pick up speed, as Arthur hums Faroe's lullaby to his daughter while rocking her to sleep. The third and final memory of Coda features Arthur teaching Faroe how to play her lullaby on the piano, using the first 5 notes as a guide and asking his daughter if she likes the song. In case these scenes didn't make it clear enough, Arthur tells us himself in Part 16, The Path, that he wrote the melody as a lullaby for his daughter, and that the song was special to them. At some point, Arthur even went so far as to fashion a metal music box containing the tune, which first appears as a King in Yellow-induced hallucination in Part 18, The Madness. Nothing gold can stay, though, and Faroe's death was just as musical as her life. In Part 15, The Storm, we hear a flashback in which Arthur plays the piano while, a short distance away, his daughter drowns in the bathtub. Originally, this song was Faroe's Lullaby, which would have created a bit of a problem timeline-wise, since in Part 17, The Fall, Arthur confirms that he was writing a song while she died. Fortunately, after pointing this out through Minecraft chat, which is undeniably the best way to correct lore issues, Harlan went ahead and changed it to a new song, titled Faroe's Goodbye. If you want to hear the uncorrected version, it's still up on YouTube, since this platform is very strict about how much a video can be adjusted once it's been posted. We also get to see an alternate version of this scene in Intermezzo, and Kane encourages Arthur to play Faroe's Goodbye there, so it seems pretty much confirmed. On the off chance that Harlan is watching this, Thank you so much for solving this little headache. You've helped me reduce this script by like 3 paragraphs. Following this event, it seems that Arthur lost much of his interest in music. As confirmed by Kane and Intermezzo, Arthur never finished Faroe's Goodbye, which makes sense for a song now tied to the death of his daughter, but other evidence seems to suggest that this disinterest extended much further. A significant moment from Arthur's past is shown to him in Part 18, The Madness, in which he sits at a piano, finding himself unable to play. When his father-in-law, Daniel, enters and tries to talk to him, relations quickly fall apart as Arthur yells for his dead wife's father to leave him alone. A pretty similar scene occurs in Part 10, The Hotel, where Arthur is playing Faroe's song, not to be confused with Faroe's Lullaby, Faroe's Goodbye, or Faroe's Waltz, on the piano before yelling at someone to leave him alone. My guess would be that this is some further interaction with Daniel, or if it takes place earlier in the timeline, the moment he got rid of Tess, Faroe's caretaker. One of the best displays of his loss of interest in music, though, can be found in his interactions with his business partner, Peter Parker Yang. Within the text, the only information we can gather is from Part 26, The Bedrock, being that Parker first approached Arthur under the guise of investigating a music-related case. Fortunately, Harlan has also given us some very useful extra-textual information in the hashtag Malevolent Memes Discord channel of the Invictus Stream server. I'm pulling out all the obscure sources for this one. On August 19th of 2022, he canonically confirmed that Parker and Arthur met after the death of Faroe, and that the case he was working on had something to do with violins, which Arthur knew nothing about. Arthur didn't wind up helping with it in the end, but he did still join up with Parker's private eye business. While killing time in a music store, Parker pressured him into playing a few keys, though Arthur stayed distant from the piano and, despite noting the quality of its construction, quickly shut down when asked. For Arthur's birthday, Parker gifted him a second-hand piano, the same piano found in their office, though Arthur still refused to play it, which is where his musical experience would end until Part 1, The Dark World. Taking a quick break before we move on, let's reflect on the role that music has served in Arthur's backstory. Music has always been tied to tragedy for him, first appearing with the death of his parents, following him through what seems to have been an unhappy marriage, eventually causing his daughter's death, and finally being abandoned altogether once life began to improve. In fact, we can use music to form a dividing line in Arthur's life, separating out the man he was before Faroe's death and who he became after it. Anytime music appears after her drowning, it was always accompanied by an attempt to pull up memories, as in his discussion with Daniel and his refusal to play for Parker. In fact, this avoidance gives us a bit of insight into Arthur's character, as it cements his tendency to lock away the past. Much like his avoidance in discussing his old life with Parker, or, as we'll see later, John, his abandonment of music serves as another way to compartmentalize and stow away a painful past. What makes this even more tragic is the purpose music originally served. As an outlet for the pain Arthur felt following the death of his parents, music would logically have been a source of comfort to him. It was eventually something he loved so much that he chose to pursue it as a career, which shows a great level of dedication. In the end, it was this dedication which cost Arthur his daughter, as his love of music outweighed the care he put toward her in a single important moment. When he abandoned music, he was abandoning his outlet, which could have helped create the emotionally withdrawn man we meet at the start of the series. Given what else we know about Arthur's intense feelings of guilt, I wouldn't be surprised if he saw it as a way to punish himself for seemingly caring more about music than Faroe, in the process only making the emotional pain of playing worse. Switching gears as we enter the series proper, I'm going to be handling things a bit less chronologically and more by song as seems appropriate. One of the most common songs in Malevolent, tied for the most appearances with Faroe's Lullaby, is You Call It Madness, But I Call It Love, a real-world song first released by Russ Columbo in September of 1931. It's actually one of the first things we hear in Malevolent, with Part 1, The Dark World, opening to a radio flipping through the stations and eventually settling on Columbo's classic right before Arthur wakes up. This song appears again later in the episode on a radio in J.D. Ackerman's bookstore, to which the entity now inhabiting Arthur's head calls out how familiar it sounds. You'd better get used to this song turning up a lot, because an episode later it closes out Part 2, The Missing Girl, over Arthur's car radio, which has just been involved in a two-vehicle, not-so-accidental crash. Arthur must have invested in a pretty good radio, because it continues to play into Part 3, The Mansion, well after the crash. Skipping ahead to Part 4, The Voices, Arthur finds himself hitchhiking with a seemingly unstable man named Kellin Holeman, who wears a gas mask and is so interesting that I actually have to take a quick detour to talk about him. Okay, Kellin is absolutely fascinating, because he might be one of the single smartest pieces of subtle foreshadowing in this entire series, and he does it multiple times over. When Arthur first runs into Kellin in Part 4, impressions are already quite threatening, as this gas mask wearing stranger asks Arthur several times in increasingly ominous contexts if he can sing, eventually ending by deciding that he'll just sing by himself. The song he settles on is Plastic Jesus, a popular folk song written by Ed Rush and George Cromarty in 1957, which is really weird. As a reminder, Malevolent is set in 1934, meaning not only that Kellin should have no knowledge of this song, but that it shouldn't even exist yet. This is made even stranger by the fact that every other song choice works out chronologically, including the song Am I Blue, written by Harry Axt and Grant Clark in 1929 and sung by a nightmare version of Kellin in Arthur's dreams. At first, I was going to write this little anachronism off as a mistake, but then I thought about it for a minute. In the same conversation, Kellin says that he hears singing in his head, and while most of us will initially interpret this as him being a few cards short of a deck, I think it might have a greater meaning. We find out later that Kellin's been keeping the head of his long-dead sister in a birdcage deep below the waters of a nearby lake, and that her head is occupied by a powerful multi-dimensional being of the Dark World, known as a Vanguard, which he talks to from time to time. It also showcases its ability to hear things being said, even when not in the direct vicinity, though Kellin seems to need proximity to the head to hear its voice. The Vanguard communicates psychically, and as we know from Arthur's use of it in the future, it can gather information from across many realities. Going back to something the entity says in Part 1, we know that the many planes of existence run at different points in their timelines. Combining all of this together, I've managed to concoct a pretty reasonable theory. I think Kellin heard the song Plastic Jesus through a game of interdimensional telephone, and his use of an anachronistic song was meant to clue us in on the fact that there's something more going on under his hood than auditory hallucinations. If there are worlds past 1957, or worlds where Plastic Jesus was written earlier, then it's entirely possible that the Vanguard returned to the world of Malevolent with the tune, and eventually passed it on to Kellin. I also think that there may be something even bigger going on with Kellin, but we'll need to wait for a bit more information on another character. Oh, and before we go back to You Call It Madness, I have to mention the fact that there are at least 2 different covers of Plastic Jesus rewritten to be Plastic Cthulhu, and they may just be my favorite thing ever. Alright, we're back from the Kellin detour, which is why we're talking about Kellin again. Okay, I promise it's relevant to the song at hand. Still in Part 4, The Voices, we return to that awkward silence of Arthur and Kellin's truck ride, where Arthur picks up the singing where Kellin left off with, what else? You Call It Madness, taking extra care to avoid the word madness so as not to offend his somewhat unsound hitchhike helper. It does not work. The song's next 2 appearances would be an episode later in Part 5, The Gift, where You Call It Madness can be heard playing through the static of a break room radio in the hospital where Arthur is stealing a set of keys. Interestingly, this cuts off the song that was playing before, which seems to imply that You Call It Madness is in some way following Arthur and John. We'll get back to that. Also, I can actually call him John now, which makes things a bit easier. Later in the episode, Arthur brushes against the dead body of Sarah Cummings, which results in the song starting to partially play, although it seems to just be a fragmentary portion of the chorus, specifically looping around the word madness. We don't have to wait very long for it to show up again, because You Call It Madness is sung by Arthur in Part 6, The Hill, as he rows toward an island in the middle of a lake, closing out the episode. Really not much to say about that one, and that's where things stay for a while, because the song doesn't reemerge until Part 13, The Dreamlands, and even then, it's in a fairly minor role. Arthur and John, now trapped in the Dreamlands, find themselves wandering through a moving forest, where Arthur decides to whistle the tune once more. There's only one more appearance of You Call It Madness in Season 2, but it's pretty important and, I believe, goes a long way to explaining what the song represents. In Part 18, The Madness, Arthur finds a record player in the King in Yellow's garden, looping the word madness. As any reasonable individual would do, Arthur proceeds to kick the record player in as its song slowly grows faster and more distorted. I'm going to need you to put a pin in that for just a second, but trust me, we'll be back to it very soon. You Call It Madness disappears for quite a while and doesn't play again until Season 4, where it has two distinct but nonetheless interesting appearances. In one, a flashback during the butcher's confession in Prelude, we hear You Call It Madness playing over the radio of a barber shop. The barber in question is moments away from becoming another piano wire victim at the hands of Collins, all of which is being recounted to Wallace Larson. The song turns up again a few episodes later in Part 33, The Father, with Arthur humming the tune as he's on his way to visit Daniel. He claims he can now no longer remember the name of the song, to which John, in a clear parallel to Part 1, responds that it sounds familiar. So what does You Call It Madness actually represent? I think the answer is pretty straightforward. It's the song of the King in Yellow's influence. Every time that the song appears, it's somehow related to the presence of the King in Yellow. At the start of the series, it's following the fragment that would become John in the moments that he's most like the king, before Arthur has a chance to bring out his humanity. In the bookstore, it's accompanied by the presence of a cultist of the king, and it seems the old woman who totaled Arthur's car was under the king's influence. The king uses Arthur's vision of Sarah's death to track them down, and while I can't see a direct link to the scene in the break room, it seems likely to me that this was the king in some way watching or possibly even helping them, with hopes of getting them down into the morgue. Part 18 may be the most overt connection to the king, but as I've laid out, the song has constantly been tied to its presence from the beginning. If nothing else, I think one of the best evidence points for this is that the song never appears in flashbacks, so it only entered Arthur's life once the king and its fragments did the same. Arthur's relationship with the song is actually one of the most curious parts of its presence, because he seems to bring it up in moments of calm while the king is still at large. He'll whistle it while walking through a forest, or sing it as he rows to an island, always steps away from danger but slightly removed from it. While it could be read as a signifier of approaching danger, I actually think it's meant to represent something much more interesting. Arthur's carrying the song of the king in his calm moments could be seen as an indication that even when things seem good, the king still weighs on his mind. It's a small nonverbal way to show that Arthur is always thinking about the purpose of his journey. Another potential interpretation is as a signifier that Arthur and John are never safe. The king's influence in the first and second seasons borders on omnipotence, so even in the calm moments, there is the threat of the King in Yellow, or one of its many servants, emerging to attack our dynamic duo. Finally, Arthur's repeated humming, whistling, and singing of You Call It Madness could be meant as a bit of light foreshadowing to John's true identity as a fragment of the King in Yellow. Arthur's choice of song could be seen as an external manifestation of the eldritch hitchhiker he carries around, showing that even when he is safe, the king is still with him in one form or another. This may even explain why Arthur stops interacting with You Call It Madness, as by the end of Season 2 and into Season 3, John has truly become his own character, entirely separated from the old god he was once a piece of. I also think there's a pretty good explanation for both times it shows back up in Season 4. Collins' murder of the barber is being recounted to Wallace Larson, who, as we find out in the same episode, is now inhabited by the remaining fragment of the King in Yellow. The reappearance of this song in this scene serves to act as a subtle hint towards Yellow's new host, as well as a display of the influence Larson, and by extension Yellow, have over the Butcher. The scene with Jon and Arthur is meant to contrast directly with this moment, as it shows how extensively Arthur and Jon have been freed of the control of the king. Arthur is no longer able to remember one of the king's most notable calling cards, while Jon, who as confirmed in Part 40, the Order was fighting for the same metaphysical space as Yellow, only felt some familiarity to it. This isn't to say that they'd forgotten their time with Hastur or the things it had done to them, just that they'd been able to know peace for a time. This then makes the sudden reintroduction of the king's influence in the form of a Yellow-directed butcher even more jarring. Alternatively, if you want to stick with my theory that Arthur's interactions with You Call It Madness foreshadowed Jon's identity, then I think there's still a good explanation. Although Jon is an entirely new character in his own right, the same metaphysical fighting mentioned above forces him to take on the role of the king on Arthur's Earth, which could have served to foreshadow the Part 40 revelation about Jon's memory loss. Despite nominally being the main theme of the series, Faroe's song doesn't actually turn up that often, having 6 total appearances, one of which we already talked about because it was in a flashback scene. As a result, this section shouldn't take that long. Faroe's song appears as early as Part 1, The Dark World, where it serves as a way for Arthur to regain his memories. A recently blinded and quite frightened Arthur finds himself unable to remember who he is, panicking until a new voice in his head tells him to sit at the piano and play a song. The first thing that comes to mind is Faroe's song, which he plays flawlessly, regaining his memories in the process. Arthur plays the song again in Part 6, The Hill, where he and Jon are waiting in a music store. When the owner asks him what the song is called, he officially name-drops it as Faroe's song, making it one of 2 songs in the entire podcast to be officially referred to by name, and the first time Faroe is ever directly referenced. The tune then takes a bit of a sabbatical, returning in coda to be played on a stage before a cheering audience. While it's debatable if this is actually diegetic, it's entirely possible that this is a memory of Arthur performing in front of a crowd, or that it's a fever dream conjured up by his dying mind, or that this is Cain playing in front of the audience he tends to conjure up. I think the truth is probably somewhere between the first 2, as the transcript seems to indicate that the player is Arthur and that it is, at least in part, a delusion or hallucination brought about by his significant injuries. A few episodes later, in Part 23, The Past, Arthur plays the tune for the much smaller audience of Uncle and Wallace Larson after completing Faroe's Lullaby, which we'll get into later. As he plays Faroe's song, he revisits his memories of Jon, while Yellow rants and raves about being confined to the mortal flesh of Arthur's body. In an almost direct parallel to the original scene from Part 1, we see Jon return to Arthur as the song ends, leaving the duo reunited to partake in their favorite pastime, falling down holes. While we now know that Yellow was actually the remaining piece of the King in Yellow sent to Arthur's body, it's important to note that at the time Arthur was under the impression that Yellow was just a factory reset Jon. This means that, as per the wording of Cain's Deal, Arthur's playing of the piano seemed to be a restoration of memory in almost the same vein as the remembrance of Part 1. As of now, the final appearance of Faroe's song came early in Season 4 during Part 31, The Nightmare. In a dream created by a supernatural being called Mr. Scratch, Arthur encounters a woman and a baby. The child originally appeared in Part 3, The Mansion, but at the time, she didn't have any connection to music, so I didn't bring her up. Fortunately though, the kid does now, as we can hear a woman, likely the woman from the diner who seemed to have lost the infant, humming Faroe's song as she presumably holds the baby. Since all of this is happening within Arthur's mind, it seems reasonable to say that Faroe's song is appearing here as a symbol of parenthood, and in particular, the care of a parent towards their child. Speaking of symbolic relevance, now that we've got every appearance of Faroe's song out of the way, we can actually start doing some analysis. One of the first things that stuck out to me was that this song, clearly named after Arthur's daughter, doesn't ever appear while she's alive. In fact, the earliest appearance of this tune seems to be shortly after her death, which I think is giving us a hint towards the true meaning of Faroe's song: remembering. Obviously, the restoration of memory in Arthur and later Jon seems pretty on the nose, But even in serving as the opening of an episode full of flashbacks, or being played on the piano by Arthur, who gave up the art for years, Faroe's song is always tied back to memories. Hell, it's named after someone who only ever appears in memories, which feels pretty explicit to me. One question we have to ask, though, is why Faroe's song also acts as the theme of Malevolent. While it appears constantly non-diegetically, its presence is pretty easy to miss within the story itself, and the role it serves is a bit niche. Why is this weird memory tune the most important song in the series? Well, aside from being the first original piece of music to appear, literally created to replace another song that you can still hear in the original YouTube uploads, I think there's a story reason. Malevolent is, at its core, a tale of identity, and how the experiences of the past shape an individual. John is different from the King in Yellow, not because of some magic shift or forced alteration, but because of his time with Arthur. Speaking of Arthur, he's spent the entire story haunted by the memories of a family he failed. Faroe's song is the perfect theme for Malevolent because it encapsulates the significance of memory, and how memories, especially painful memories, can change a person. While researching this video, I originally thought that Faroe's Lullaby and Faroe's song were different parts of the same melody, and in a way, I was right. While they might not actually be the same song, they are certainly two sides of the same coin, and I can prove it to you using its 7 non-flashback appearances and a single specific object. You see, every appearance of Faroe's Lullaby within the actual events of Malevolent is related to a particular item I've mentioned in passing, the music box. The music box is first referenced in Part 18, The Madness, but it doesn't actually appear until one episode later in Part 19, The Prison. While looking through the wares of the trader, Arthur finds an ornate metal box with a painting of a young girl, presumably Faroe, on top of it. Arthur trades for the box, telling John that it had once belonged to his daughter and that she had been buried with it. He also claims that the king couldn't have known about it, which is demonstrably false because only one episode earlier, the music box is mentioned within a hallucination created by the king. Either way, it turns out that the actual box was not a creation of the King in Yellow, instead being revealed as one of hundreds of lures used by Cain in Part 20, The King, to draw in Arthur. In the same scene, we can hear Cain playing Faroe's Lullaby on the piano, which he calls catchy, either as a way to appear friendlier to Arthur, to mock Arthur, or just because he likes it. Later in Part 20, as Arthur, removed himself to keep the king from taking John, he opens the music box one last time to hear Faroe's Lullaby, which, seems important to point out. Even after Arthur has been sent to Addison sans John, the music box continues to play a central role in the story. The other fragment of the king, which he calls Yellow, asks about the music box when they look through his bag in Part 22, The Town, but Arthur refuses to elaborate. He's forced to reveal more about it one episode later in Part 23, The Past, in which Jack Larson, also known as Uncle, seems to take a liking to the box and the tune contained within. Throughout Arthur and Wallace's conversation, Uncle sits in the corner, flicking the music box open and closed. When Arthur finally manages to piss off Wallace, he responds incredibly maturely by taking the music box from Uncle, dropping it on the ground, and crushing it. Uncle is unsurprisingly irritated by this, and he decides to make Arthur play the song for him on a nearby piano. The final time that the song has appeared, at least for now, is in Part 26, The Bedrock. While hunting Wallace through the Larson estate, Uncle catches the sound of Faroe's Lullaby, which leads him to Uncle messing with the distinctly unbroken music box. Enraged, Arthur stabs Uncle and tracks him across the house, quickly finishing him off with a few more stab wounds. Obviously, Faroe's Lullaby, much like Faroe's song, is a symbol of memory within Malevolent, but I think these examples show an interesting second meaning it takes on during Season 3. Most of the third season centers around the foil characters of Arthur Lester and Wallace Larson, and I believe that their treatments of Faroe's music box are meant to emphasize that dichotomy. I think it's pretty clear that the audience is meant to make connections between Larson's sacrifice of Addison and Arthur's negligence of Faroe, and the music box acts as a direct symbol of Larson's treatment of Addison. We see Larson appreciate the music box, showing a clear respect for its music, but when it suits him, he takes the box and destroys it. Then, impossibly, the box is restored in its next appearance, showing an impermanence of his actions. In fact, this mysterious restoration could say a lot about Wallace Larson. We see throughout the series that Wallace acts without much fear for consequence, and it's entirely possible that this scene is showing why. Even when Larson destroys something, it seems that it can always be restored, which could be extended as far as the sacrifice of his own daughter. Larson's original motivations seem to have been centered around restoring his dead family members, but he was willing to destroy his own daughter in the process, who was returned to him in the form of a town. It's all connected in that cyclicality. The cycle even appears in the history of the music box. The music box was constructed when Faroe was alive, but was abandoned with her death, its tune literally buried with her. Despite this, it found a way to return, reappearing in the Dreamlands, death and rebirth. Either there's some serious symbolic value to it, or Kane just gave one of his spares to Uncle. Now let's talk about the character who inspired this whole video, Dennis Collins, also known as the Butcher. Collins acts as a secondary antagonist for the first half of Season 4, and is one of the most musical characters in the entire series. Specifically, Collins can often be heard whistling, humming, and singing the Canadian folk song Peggy Gordon. It was originally created as early as 1820, but really gained popularity as a folk song in the 1950s. While that might seem anachronistic, the earliest records of the song come from New York and Boston, so if the Butcher were to find it in 1934, he's certainly looking in the right place. The song first appears at the same time as the Butcher, with him whistling its tune at the very start of Prelude as he walks into a church to talk to Larson. Interestingly, the Butcher's next appearance in Part 29, The Train, not only contains no Peggy Gordon, but doesn't feature a single music reference. Fortunately, Collins makes up for this in his next appearance, as in both Part 33, The Father, and Part 34, The Butcher comes blasting through Daniel Saltzman's door, singing Peggy Gordon at the top of his lungs. This bombastic rendition continues as he hunts Arthur into Part 34, and the song returns in whistling form later in the episode once Collins has dealt with 2 police officers. There's also a slightly stranger aspect to this episode I want to call out, because it's one of the few times that I'll actually be talking about the background music. You see, the Butcher canonically hears music in his head as he works, which means that the instrumental Peggy Gordon track playing in the background as he hunts Arthur might actually exist in-universe, and thus would be diegetic. In that sense, Peggy Gordon appears all throughout the episode, but most significantly during the Butcher's preparations to torture Arthur. When asked if he has a conscience, specifically defined as a voice in his head that tells him right from wrong, the Butcher tells Arthur that he only hears music, which builds as he works. He describes the strings as the heart of the orchestra, which is then built on by a flute, harps, choir, and a piano. As he says this, we can hear the background music literally building itself up, with each new addition striking exactly as Collins calls it out, although it's all abruptly cut off when Arthur tells Collins of his own relationship with music. The last time Peggy Gordon appears is once again accompanying the Butcher in Part 40, The Order, where once his true loyalties have been revealed, Collins kicks his butchery into overdrive with the melody. Before I get to explaining, we might as well go through all of the Butcher's music references not directly related to Peggy Gordon. In Prelude, we find out that one of his preferred murder weapons is piano wire, specifically because of how quiet it is. There's definitely a bit of irony with a usually sonorous device of creation being used in silent destruction. The Butcher talks about the mechanisms of music quite a bit in his appearances. For example, during the hunt of Arthur in Part 34, he directly relates his actions to musical notation, having been forced to work in fortissimo over his preferred pianissimo. For those of you who didn't have to take a music theory class in middle school, fortissimo and pianissimo are opposite ends of the loudness scale. In saying that he has to work in fortissimo rather than pianissimo, the butcher is saying that he had to be much louder than he would usually like. He brings up dynamics again later in the episode as he describes the song he and Arthur are creating through their chase. This is the first time he claims to hear music in his head, which, as mentioned before, is pretty important. To close out Part 34's musical references, we have the final line of the episode. As Collins leaves to go finish off the miraculously alive Daniel, he says to himself, "Once more with feeling." While the exact etymology of this phrase is unknown, it seems to have originated from theater and musical performance, such as orchestra. This is backed up in the episode by the immediate return of Peggy Gordon's symphonic rendition, this time with no Arthur to cut it off. What makes this so interesting is that this line appears again in Part 38, The Tear, where John repeats the phrase. I'm not totally sure what the implications of this are, but it definitely means something. In case it wasn't obvious yet, Part 34 is kind of a weird episode of Malevolent. For 33 parts, we hadn't heard anything but the perspective of Arthur, yet here was a random episode where we got to see the world through the eyes of Collins. Lore-wise, it made almost no sense. Until the next episode. Part 35, The Deal, opens with the return of Mr. Scratch, who tells Arthur that he was dreaming of music. I think the implication here is that Part 34 was all a dream, not in the sense that it didn't happen, but that Arthur was reliving his memory through the eyes of another. Put a pin in this, because it'll definitely be coming back. Part 35 also features a standoff between Arthur and the butcher, which nearly ends in catastrophe when Arthur asks the butcher if he needs to whistle to get his attention, in allusion to the idea that he's Wallace's obedient dog. Rather than pulling him deeper into a spiral of rage, though, this remark seems to steady him, as he claims that whistling is his game and turns back to the injured Daniel. It's possible that Arthur inadvertently bringing up music had reminded him why he was there and kick-started the melody again, but without a window into his head, we simply don't know. Finally, in Part 40, The Order, there are two moments from the butcher which have to do with music. Right before betraying Larson, Arthur tells Collins to start the music, which is then directly paralleled at the end of the episode when local eldritch horror Kane tells him that the song is over. This happens when Kane seems to feel that Collins has outlived his usefulness, and as the words are uttered, the butcher is temporarily freed of the music in his head, only for him to suddenly also be freed of the head that the music was in. It's this scene in particular that really gets the wheels in my head spinning, because it implies a level of connection between Collins, Arthur, and Kane that seems to spread a lot deeper than it first appears. When I was originally working on this video in September and October, the main premise was the idea that the butcher might have some supernatural connection, and I think the episodes since then have only supported it. To start, let's talk about the similarities between Collins and another important character, Kellin Holeman. Yeah, I'm back to Kellin. Sue me, he's important. Aside from their shockingly similar sounding names, seriously, Collins and Kellin are way too close for this not to be intentional. It's kind of hard to avoid noticing that they both hear music. While the butcher's music seems to be mostly instrumental and Kellin's music is directly attributed to the singing of voices in his head, both of them express these internal melodies through a propensity for singing the tunes out loud. The real kicker for me, though, is that Arthur gets two separate dream sequences in Season 3, and the notable characters from them are Kellin and Collins, respectively. Hell, Mr. Scratch is even present both times, but speaking of Scratch, Kellin is kind of a weird form for him to take, no? I mean, Arthur has run into plenty of people on his journey, and Kellin is just one of them who hasn't been relevant for ages. I know he sort of flips through other options later in the episode, but he starts with Kellin. Why? I know this goes a bit into meta-interpretation and trying to decipher the whims of the author, but I feel like this is a big flashing sign from Harlan saying, hey, Kellin was important. You need to remember that he existed. The parallels between Kellin and the other antagonist with music on the mind almost draw themselves. So, what does this mean for Collins? As I mentioned in my above theory, it seems likely to me that Kellin's singing voices come from a supernatural entity, either the Vanguard or the ever-influential King in Yellow, so why couldn't the Butchers come from a similar source? While a Vanguard would explain how he seems to track Arthur so well, and we know that he has had interactions with a fragment of the king through Wallace, I don't think we have enough to say for sure. If anything, I actually think the evidence could point towards Cain. We know that he can press the mute button on Collins, so who's to say he didn't put the music there in the first place? He seems to have a fondness for music, especially instrumental music, and with his elaborate plots in mind, he might have just seen the Butcher as another challenge for Arthur to overcome. Still separated from all of this, Collins does seem to have some ties to the supernatural, or at least the Order of the Fallen Star. While I don't find it surprising that the mysterious club of the uber-rich would have a hitman on hand, it is interesting that he's the one Wallace picks. Larson has basically got enough money that he could pick whoever he wants, so why Collins? He's present at the Order meeting Arthur attends, so maybe the Butcher is actually a member. Then of course there's his uncanny ability to track Arthur, even if our protagonist is surprisingly bad at covering his tracks for a private eye, as well as his profound skill for killing people, even in situations where it seems like he shouldn't be able to. I mean, he turned the tides on those cops pretty quick, and while I imagine you get a talent for violence over implied years of being a hitman, these are talents that I could see a bit of supernatural help elevating. Of course, there's always the more likely Doyleist explanation that Harlan just wanted an imposing, omnipresent threat for his cat-and-mouse game in Season 4, and that the things that make a threatening enemy also happen to be a bit supernatural-esque. At the same time, though, Collins also gets compared to one other character a lot, a very musical character. Arthur Lester. He says that Arthur seems to understand him in a way that others don't, and lo and behold, Arthur's also been pretty well touched by the darker forces beyond the veil. All of this brings up a question in my mind, though. Did I dismiss Malevolent's background music too quickly? Is it possible that Arthur is actually hearing music? If the background music of Part 34 can be diegetic, then why can't the background music in every other episode? Sure, the easy answer is that he never brings it up, but he was a composer for years, and people think in all sorts of different ways. Maybe for Arthur, the score is just his normal. This theory has definitely drifted off into speculation land, so feel free to take all of this with a grain of salt, but I don't know. Take these parallels to the logical extreme, and you wind up with some interesting implications. Oh, right, Peggy Gordon. I said I'd get back to that, didn't I? Why Peggy Gordon? Honestly, I think the answer could just be that it's a song with a lot of Irish sound that Harlan would probably have known thanks to its popularity in Canada, but it is worth mentioning the whole theme of love. While talking to a mortally wounded Officer Khan in Part 34, Collins compares the hunt to the act of falling in love, with the dedication of hunting taking center stage. It's interesting to note that, while he calls out Arthur for being different, he makes no note of the falling in love bit being different. Now, am I saying that the Butcher is in love with Arthur? No, of course not. It's a metaphor, a comparison between two acts of devotion. Still, the existence of that metaphor, as well as the instrumental Peggy Gordon playing in the background as he describes it, makes me think that the specific tune might be an extension of the idea. Collins is pursuing and Arthur is avoiding him, leaving him not unlike the slighted lover in Peggy Gordon. Malevolent has a lot of general music references, or references that I'm not sure how to categorize, so in the name of completion, here's an extra section for all the stuff I couldn't find a place for. To make this assorted category a bit more intelligible, I'll be cutting it up into different subsections, which will cover a different type of music reference. The first of these is one-off songs. These are songs that diegetically appear in one or a small number of episodes, which simply aren't significant enough to give a whole section to. I'll also be throwing in songs that I just can't identify, which happened a lot more than I would have liked. Part 5, The Gift, features the first of these one-off songs, being St. Louis Blues. If you think back to the You Call It Madness section, you'll notice that I mentioned it cutting off another song. I had no idea what this song was, but fortunately, I managed to get the help of Seer of Time, who I have to give a massive thank you to. If it weren't for her, there would be a lot more unidentified songs on this list. Actually, if you want a playlist of a bunch of these songs, Seer's gone through the effort to put that together, so I'll leave a link in the description down below so y'all can go show her some love. Part 6, The Hill, has the craziest one-offs, and you have Seer to thank for the fact that I even know half of them exist. Originally, I thought that this episode had 2 songs, one which played in the diner and another which played in the gun shop, neither of which I could identify. When I was talking about the songs I couldn't identify with Seer, she revealed that there weren't 2 songs in the episode, but 3, as there was a very clear division in the gun shop. She also managed to track down one of those 2 gun shop songs, being Will Be the Same, a tune from the 1931 Broadway musical America's Sweetheart, written by Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart and sung by Frank Luther. From the tiny bit of research I've done, it doesn't seem like this song thematically connects with Malevolent, but that makes sense thanks to a later revelation. You see, as I was in the recording process of this video, Harlan dropped another big piece of information on us, a 25-minute playlist of hit songs from the Roaring 20 which he used as the radio songs throughout the series. Needless to say, Seer was ecstatic and found not only the identities of the 2 other songs, but that there was an additional song in the diner that we had missed altogether. Those songs, by the way, are Johnny Marvin's 1929 True Blue Lou in the gun shop, and Paul Whiteman's 1920 song, The Japanese Sandman, in the diner. As of recording, the other diner song hasn't yet been identified, but I bet that and more will probably have been found by the time that this video goes live. It isn't until part 31, The Nightmare, that we hear one-off songs again, but this episode does give us a 2-for-1. Early in the episode, Nightmare Kellin can be heard singing Am I Blue, which was originally written by Harry Axt and Grant Clark in 1929. The song is pretty down, as you might expect from the title, but it also leans on loneliness, which could fit the character of Kellin, or more importantly, Scratch, who is controlling the dream. At the end of the episode, we hear another song that may or may not be diegetic, likely leaning to non-diegetic, but just uncertain enough for me to mention. The song is I'll See You in My Dreams, originally written by Isham Jones in 1924, and if you can't figure out how I'll See You in My Dreams relates to Part 31, The Nightmare, I'm afraid I can't help you. Since it can't help but tack on more music, Part 34, The Butcher, has 2 songs worth mentioning, only one of which has been identified. Fortunately, it's also the first one, being the jazzy music playing on the radio of the apartment Arthur escapes into, whose inhabitant Collins brutally murders. According to the Malevolent wiki, I would not have gotten this one on my own, I can promise you that. This song is apparently Come Easy Go Easy Love, released in 1931 by Hoagie Carmichael, who, as mentioned in the Arthur's backstory section, Arthur apparently composed some songs for. There is no basis for this claim, but I choose to believe that this means Arthur was lying through his teeth in that scene, and went with Carmichael because it was the last singer he'd heard. This episode has another song playing very faintly in the background of the first phone call between Wallace Larson and the Butcher, but it's just too hard to make out, so for now, it has to be left at another song. Oh my god, here's one that I totally almost missed. Part 36, The Faith, which has music in the bar that Oscar and Arthur visit. This is, unfortunately, another unidentified song, so there's really not much to say. Hey, Editing Kai here to tell y'all that Seer found it. The song in the bar is Virginia Liston's Night Latchkey Blues, released in 1925. In the next episode, Part 37, The Farm, we hear Oscar humming a tune, which I am embarrassed to say I did not recognize. Fortunately, Abriel, who you can find as @Devonair on Twitter, came to my rescue on the Invictus Stream Discord server by pointing out that this is, very obviously, She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain. I don't know how I missed this, but please go check out Abriel, who helped prevent this terrible blunder. Intermezzo has a whole host of one-off songs, rivaling Part 34 in sheer musicality, so let's go through them. First of all, while giving a full lore drop to Arthur and John, Kane plays a bunch of melodies on the piano, 3 of which have been confirmed to be songs. The easiest was the middle one, which is said in the official transcript to be Faroe's Waltz, a song which is otherwise only ever played as non-diegetic background music. The choice to have Kane play it here is an amazingly subtle way to show that he's beyond the normal world of Malevolent. The other 2 were among a whole host of little tunes that Kane played, but I was fortunate enough to get an answer about them from the big man himself, Harlan. The first is apparently a song called Kane's Theme, which was not what I expected, but I'll take it. The last then isn't a song itself, but is a riff on Faroe's song, following the same progression. The other ones are, as far as I can tell, just Kane messing around on the piano. The other semi-one-off song in this episode is, of course, Faroe's Goodbye, which Cain encourages Arthur to play on the very same piano he originally used to create it. Well, an alternate universe version of it, but the point still stands. While we do technically hear this song one other time, it's in one of the scenes I included in Arthur's past, and I wasn't going to make a whole category for one song appearance. The song is played throughout the scene, with occasional gentle reminders from Cain to continue, though, as Cain implied in his dialogue, it was never originally finished. I'm not sure if that means Arthur's writing on the fly here or not, but honestly, there's a lot I'm not sure about here. Really, the one thing I am sure about is the fact that Harlan needs to stop calling songs Faroe's blank. Oh my god, why are there so many? With that, we're on to the next subcategory, which is the mention of music concepts, musical instruments, or just music generally. In fact, this should be made a lot clearer thanks to the fact that there's exactly one moment from each of those subsections. The first one comes in part 15, The Storm, when John says that the thing he misses the most about Earth is the piano. This moment is, at least in my opinion, incredibly important, because I think it shows part of what makes John a different character from the king. The piano is a symbol of John's time with Arthur, as well as the peace that can be found even in the midst of chaos. Yes, John is technically a fragment, and thus a unique entity for the entire time that we know him, but the act of becoming John, a being that would actively fight against its own reunification, is all about the memories he gets from Arthur. Remember what I said about songs representing memory? That idea might just extend to the instrument used to create those songs in the first place, too. Part 26, The Bedrock, is our general music reference, as when describing his perfect night with John, Arthur mentions music. It's possible that this is hinting at a sense of restoration or accepting the past, or that he's focusing on music because it's something he can actually experience, but it seems more likely to me that it's just him building a scene. Finally, we have the music theory reference in Intermezzo. When Cain offers to erase Arthur's memory, he refers to the deal as DC al Coda, which he specifically says is a joke between him and Arthur. This is because DC al Coda, or Da Capo al Coda, is a musical phrase which is a little hard to explain, but in brief means to skip a section you've already played. However, this little joke hides an amazing double meaning, because Coda is also the big episode between Cain and Arthur where John is missing. What's more, this is the episode where Cain makes his original deal with Arthur to return a memoryless John. Harlan, oh my god, you creative bastard. I don't think there's anything more to say on that, so I'll just move on to the two times when music is used as a metaphor for something else, both times by Cain, who seems to just like metaphors. In part 20, The King, he calls John and Arthur's journey a little song he wants to see play out, which is certainly an interesting way to put it, especially with the added context of his intermezzo metaphor. Yeah, it's time to talk about the big lore drop, how it was explained, and what it actually means. When explaining the concept of I hate to say multiverse, but it is the right word, multiverse to Arthur, he uses a piano to explain his point. Each world, he says, exists on one key, with the gods only existing behind the piano and the strings and hammers. They're only able to affect one key at a time, leading to manifestations on every key, but the essences of their beings exist below the hood. When one god, the black goat Shub-Niggurath, was pulled out and, as Cain puts it, left on the bench, she temporarily had access to all of the keys before getting metaphysically erased from all existence save one world, which may have led to that world's Nyarlathotep, now Cain, and that world's Arthur, now our Arthur, somehow being special. That leads us to the last full subcategory, the stuff that could be music related or might just be general audio things. These are the elements that could be related to music, but could just as easily have nothing to do with music. For instance, a great example of this can be found in almost every episode of the series. If you listen closely to John's voice, especially in the earlier seasons, you'll notice that the filter on it does have a certain melodic quality. Specifically, it tends to rise in tone as he speaks, and while this may just be a way to make his voice sound peculiar, it still fits into the theme of music. Part 8, The Caves, has something I thought might be music, but on closer inspection seems not to be. As John reads the phrase, "The King in Yellow," we can hear radio static building and a PA system chiming. I'm not really sure if you can consider a PA system chime to be a song, in fact it's probably best not to, but when you've spent hours and hours and hours re-listening to this podcast trying to make sure you haven't missed anything, you start to hear music everywhere. Part 12, the end, contains another moment that is probably just related to audio, but takes on a different meaning when you consider the significance of music in Malevolent, and specifically Arthur Lester's life. Right as he finishes listening to the tapes recounting Kellin's time in the Arkham Psychiatric Hospital, where y'all will be able to find me after making this video, Arthur mentions how lonely a room can seem once sounds have stopped. While this is obviously related to the tape, I can't help but feel like there's a deeper meaning just under the surface of those words. After all, I imagine that his home got very quiet once he stopped playing. Since these are basically increasing in music relevance as time goes on, let's talk about the radio from Part 14, The Desert. While going through the items in Frank Underhill's apartment, John mentions a radio, which catches Arthur's metaphorical eye, likely as a potential means to signal for help. Arthur says that the radio is specifically similar to the one they had encountered in J.D. Ackerman's bookstore, which, if you'll recall, was playing music. Is it a stretch? Sure. Am I including it anyways? Yeah, why not? Finally, there's just all of Season 3, but specifically Part 28, The Undefeated, in which Arthur makes the monstrous Larson child in the mines significantly more defeated by using a flute, which is a musical instrument. Seriously though, this one is actually interesting because I feel like there's a non-zero possibility that this is meant to parallel Faroe's death. The flute is used to subdue and perhaps even calm the invisible creature for most of the season. But when Arthur finally uses the flute while psychically linked to the creature, it dies. It just explodes. The fact that it was killed by Arthur playing a musical instrument that had previously calmed it is already enough for me to think of Faroe. But when you consider the established parallels between Arthur and Faroe, and Wallace and Addison, the fact that another of Wallace's children happens to be the victim in this exchange just makes it all come together. There is one last music moment that I need to give its own subsection because I just don't have an explanation for it. Turning to earlier in Season 3, we find Part 21, The Unconquerable, in which that piano moment happens. As a potentially drugged Arthur, now with the voice of Yellow in his head, sits in a bar, he's made aware of the piano in the room, to which he excitedly and rather loudly reacts. This gets the other patrons riled up as they begin to grow excited at the prospect of the piano being played. Before Arthur can walk over to fulfill their wishes though, a wiry old man moves to the piano, which quiets the room. The man begins to slam on the keys, first seemingly at random, then slowly evolving into what the transcript calls a dark dirge. The patrons begin to slam their fists on the table to the rhythm, and the piece picks up in an energetic jig. The bar erupts in dancing, which is a kind word for what they do, as they just seem to stand with their arms out to their sides and sway back and forth. Arthur, in his infinite wisdom, decides that this is a great time to laugh, which breaks the song and draws everyone's attention to him. Not a great choice. This scene is just a whole new level of incomprehensible. It's such a creepy moment, and the fact that it's never explained makes it that much stranger. I do not understand what purpose it serves, aside from making Addison seem weird, but there's one detail that sent me down a crazy spiral. Seer of Time, bless her heart, pointed out to me something that April had apparently found. Oh yeah, all the characters are coming together for this one. If you listen closely to the dark dirge they play in the bar, you'll notice that it has the same chord progression as Faroe's Waltz. What the f***? What? Faroe's Waltz is a background song, which, as far as I'm aware, does not exist in canon. The closest we get is whatever the one piano melody Kane played was, and he's an extra-dimensional being, who's basically taking a swing at the fourth wall every other minute he's on screen, so why would it be here? I guess you could argue that this episode is dealing with the aftermath of Kane's actions, so he could be present here, but that doesn't seem to make much sense. You know, why is it called Faroe's Waltz anyways? Do we have an answer for that? No? Great, okay. The other possible answer is that it does exist in canon. Arthur is the one who created it, and in this moment his memory of that song is getting twisted around with the reality of the situation, thanks to whatever they put in his drink. But that requires so many leaps in logic, I might as well try out for the NBA. There is some merit to the idea that whatever Arthur took is making this scene seem more unusual, though. It's possible that he's not the most reliable narrator in this moment, but at the same time, he seems to be the least stable part of this event. Everything else seems decently solid. Maybe this is all the influence of that thing in the mines, or whatever helped Larson create it. If this is a Dunwich horror situation, and it seems like it is, then there's definitely some powerful forces entwined with the town of Addison. We know Wallace gave up a lot to make the town, but we're not entirely sure what that means. It seems like some townspeople, or at least some members of the Larson family, aren't entirely human, so maybe they were created along with the town, and that explains their weird behavior. I really do not know how to explain this scene, which is why I will leave it as the last canonical music reference in this video. Lucky me though, the non-canon Christmas special, Benevolent, features a massive amount of music too. Yippee. Judging by what we know about the rules of Malevolent, it seems that this holiday special is a product of Kane stealing copies of Arthur and John from different timelines to act out his little Christmas vignette, complete with all the audience winking and meta jokes you could ever want. Early on in the episode, Arthur and John do a duet cover of Baby It's Cold Outside, which becomes incredibly funny when you remember that it's all one guy doing many voices. What's the lore relevance behind Baby It's Cold Outside? Doesn't matter, it's not canon. I can already tell this section is going to be very cathartic. Oscar brings in the next music reference from the frosty outdoors, warning Arthur and John that the parents of a children's church choir have been snowed in, meaning that they can't see the performance. As a solution, Oscar chooses to bring the children through a Terran reality at the Allen farm, across the dimension of pain, and out the other side for the parents to enjoy. I'm sure nothing bad will happen to those kids. I'm also sure that I'm lying. Once the power goes out, one of Arthur's first concerns is the fact that he won't be able to listen to the radio, and this list of things he can't do expands by one when he burns his hand, meaning he can't play piano. Of course, John then lampshades the fact that it's surprising Arthur could play the piano to start with when he had control of the other hand, but it's all non-canon, so I don't have to worry about that nonsense. That is a question for some other video, because I'm sure this one is already too damn long. Regardless, they do wind up finding someone to play their Christmas tunes, specifically holiday recording artist Christian Noel Peterson, who shows up just in the nick of time to play Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. I am so glad that this episode is non-canon, because if I had to figure out how that relates to anything, I might have a conniption. But nope, non-canon! Finally, we return to the children's choir, who have, in the words of Oscar, had their flesh meld with the alien world upon moving through the outer dimension, but whose voices can still sing. We then get a full clip of children singing Jingle Bells, a few Hallmark remarks from all of our favorite characters, and the opportunity we've all wanted to hear Arthur Lester's head explode like a watermelon. Because it's not canon. None of this is canon. Why am I For as ready as I am to close out this script almost a year in the making, I do want to give some overall thoughts on Malevolent's use of music. As an extension of what I said about 20 pages of script ago, I love stories that know how to use the strengths of their medium, and Malevolent uses each and every one. Yes, its incorporation of audio into its narrative is masterful, but even things like the lack of visuals having a reasonable but still interesting explanation, or the use of community polling to dictate the actions of characters, show a thorough understanding of what makes audio dramas in the age of the internet work. I think music is the most interesting example though, because it's something a lot of people underappreciate. I know that I tend to when making the audio for these videos. I found one playlist of vaguely autumnal lo-fi and said that's good enough, but it really shows a dedication to quality that Harlan places so much significance on where music shows up and how it's used. I'm even a little bit disappointed that I didn't get a chance to talk about the non-diegetic music, because there are a ton of interesting choices made with it. How about this? If y'all can get this video to 100,000 likes, then I might consider it. Otherwise, you cannot make me do this again. You just can't. I am done. Speaking of which, it's time for an outro. This script took so long to write that I literally changed names halfway through, which is crazy. If you're wondering why that is, by the way, there will be a video on the end card, but I want you to listen to this last bit. You've made it this far anyways, right? I first came up with the idea of a music-themed Malevolent video after listening to Part 34 The Butcher, which released last July. The video as it exists now has been in active development since October. The amount of time and effort that I've put into this thing is just absurd, so really, truly, I want to thank y'all from the bottom of my heart for making it this far into the video. It means a lot. Speaking of people to thank, obviously, I want to give one more thank you to everyone in the Malevolent community who has helped me in this video's production, especially Seer of Time. Without her, this video would be missing a lot of information, and she put hours of work into finding some of these songs, so please go check her links out and show her some love for all this effort. Paying respects to those who came before me, I have to give massive kudos to Abriel, who laid a huge amount of the groundwork I built this on and was nothing but helpful throughout the process. I also want to give a bit of thanks to Harlan Guthrie himself for cooperating with my nonsense and being pleasant to talk to every time I've interacted with him. Half of these answers would have literally been impossible if it weren't for some of his last-minute saves. Finally, a special thank you to the Captain's Desk at the Captain's Desk on Twitter, who has created a lot of official artwork for Malevolent, including the background of today's thumbnail, which is an expanded shot of the Season 4 logo. Please go show him some love. I'm very grateful that he told me I could use it for the video. If you made it this far and somehow haven't listened to Malevolent, first, why? Second, I commend your resilience, and third, please go give it a listen. If you've already listened to it, give it another go. I promise you'll notice new things. If you want to participate in all of the voting stuff that happens, go sign up for the Malevolent Patreon. Great way to support the show. With all of that out of the way, I think I might be done. Finally done. Good night, YouTube people.